Good morning. Wonderful to see everybody here today. We got just a few, what I would refer to as house cleaning things to do before we get into Bible study. One is next week we start with the book of Daniel. Brother Day had sent out on an email 94-page booklet to deal with that. And since it's been a while back, does anybody need him to send that out again? Do you have access to it? Can you print it off, or do you need to see me and I'll make copies of the one I've got to get you? Think about it and let me know whether you need me to do it for you or have him send it out again. He may send it out again anyway, but if you want, I'll make copies from the one I have for it. Next would be after evening service. It is the fourth Sunday, so we will have our youth devotional downstairs. And incorporated with the youth devotional, at the end of the youth devotional, we got a surprise party for Andrea. We're going to have a cake and ice cream. Today's her birthday. And I'm not going to tell you how old she is, but I can give you a hint. Last year she was 71. So we have some folks that are traveling that we need to keep those in our thoughts and prayers. The Mongs are traveling, maybe some others. I also got a text from the Moody's just before Bible study this morning that both Kevin and Emma are not feeling well. They're going to worship on the YouTube or Zoom or whatever they call that thing at home, so we need to keep them in our prayers. Terry had put off, or they had put off, or anyway, something got rescheduled on his infusion, and that's going to be when now? This coming Tuesday. So remember all the others that are on the sick and injured list. Also remember the Cox family. Harvey had, Jim's brother had passed away, and the funeral was yesterday on that. Also, some of you may remember that several years ago the Colts worshiped with us, and Robbie had passed away in the middle of the week or so. Keep them in your prayers. Is there anybody else? Seems like there's supposed to be somebody. Oh, yes. Jackie Conyers has gone to Texas to take care of, or help take care of, Dave's mother and stepfather. She had 2 pacemakers put in, and then his stepfather has some ongoing health issues that she's going to try to help them take care of. Now, I'm not a medical doctor by any means, but to my knowledge, putting in 2 pacemakers is not all that common, and the reason that you would do that would be, one would regulate the heart beat as far as the timing issue goes, and the other would regulate the heart beat as far as the rhythm of the heart beating. So it's pretty uncommon. If there's any medical people in here that could give me a better explanation of that. Okay. So keep her in your prayers as she travels, and also for the family as she takes care of them. Brother Kyle, would you lead us in a prayer before we begin study this morning, please?
Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for this opportunity that we have to come together and to study a portion of your word. Father, help us all to take advantage of this opportunity and to put your word in our heart. Father, we ask that you do all those who need you to say today. Help them to gain strength.
Amen. We had finished chapter 9 of the book of Esther. Today is generally going to be a review, but if you look at Esther 10, we didn't do those last 3 verses of Esther 10, and basically the important part of that is that King Ahasuerus was kind to the Jews, and if you'll notice particularly verse 2, it said, all the acts of his power and of his might and the declaration of the greatness of Mordecai, whereunto the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? If you recall, at the beginning of the book of Esther, and I think it would be easier for us to review Esther since that was the last book we looked at, and then go back and also and look at Ezra and Nehemiah. Also, the reason we want to review Esther first is because it fits in around Ezra chapter 6, 7. So there's, it's just sort of a sub-book there. The best way to look at it, I guess, would be if you're looking at history, American history as it goes along, Alabama history also goes along, so it just depends on which one you want to dive into and look at particularly, the big view or the one story here. But if you recall at the very beginning of the book, what was Mordecai's position? Who was Mordecai, and what was happening in his life? Your turn. Yes, sir.
I believe he was Esther's uncle, and he basically raised her. He was a Jew.
Well, actually, he was her cousin. If you'll look at verse 7 of chapter 2, he brought up Hadassah, which is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took her for his own daughter. So Esther's father was Mordecai's uncle, which would make them cousins. Okay? What else? More than likely, he was a gatekeeper and at the palace, because he could roam around and go places that the common person couldn't go. He would often go by and inquire of Esther in the house for the women, which they sort of kept them secluded, and not just anybody had access to that area. So he was Esther's cousin, took care of her as though she were his daughter. What else do we know about Mordecai? He was a Jew. He came what?
He came into exile.
He came back from the group that was in that exile in Babylon. What about friends or enemies? Was Haman his friend? Haman, one of the princes, didn't like him at all. Why did Haman not like Mordecai? I'm sorry? He would not pay him the honor that Haman thought he should be paid. So in essence, he was out to kill Mordecai. But then if you'll look at verse 3 of chapter 10, we've already gone through last week and the week before showing how things turned around, that instead of Mordecai being hung on the gallows, that Haman was hung on the gallows, and his brothers, and there was a flip-flop there, but if you look at verse 3, from Mordecai starting out as being the gate, I'm going to call him a doorkeeper, because I believe that's what he was, and Haman not liking him and almost being put to death and almost to the point of all the Jews being annihilated, look at his position in verse 3 of chapter 10. For Mordecai the Jew was next unto King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and accepted of the multitude of his brethren, seeking the wealth of his people, and speaking peace to all his seed. So he went from being what would generally be looked at as a lowly servant's position of opening and closing the door and making sure certain people did or didn't get in, to second in command to the king. An exile returned and put in that position. Does that remind you of anybody else in Scripture? It should. I'm sorry? David, and if we go back a little earlier in history, how about Joseph? So if we go back to chapter 1 then and just look at a few things, I want to try to put things in sort of a timeline for you, because where it says that in verse 1, well, let's go down to verse 2. No, let's go down to verse 3. In the third year of his reign, in other words, in the third year of Xerxes' reign, and he had made the feast and did all this, we know from history that he took over ruling about 486 BC. So this verse here would put it at about 483 BC. And then if we look at some other events in this book that takes place, the book of Esther covers basically the period of time from 483 BC to 473 or 74 BC. So it covers about a 9 or a 10-year period of time. And like I say, it fits in somewhere around chapter 6, 7 of Ezra. This is taking place while the other events in Ezra are taking place. Now, to me, this is one of the things that causes most people problems when they start studying the Bible. They want to look at it, and as they go along, they think that the Bible is in chronological order. It's not. What you have to do is look at when it was written and how those overlaps take place. For instance, when we go back to the book of Ezra, in chapter 1 of the book of Ezra, I've got that picked out, but I'm getting to another verse here. Hang on. Okay. When we look at the chapter 1 of the book of Ezra, it said, "Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled." This is Jeremiah the prophet. When did Jeremiah the prophet live? If we go over to the book of Jeremiah, what period of time does it cover? It covers from 627 BC to 586 BC. What happened that's important in the year 586 BC? That was the final carrying away. So the book of Jeremiah, even though it's books past where we are in our study, it still precedes the book of Ezra and Nehemiah and Esther. But the verse I was getting to where he prophesied this was chapter 25 of Jeremiah, verse 12 through 14. Chapter 25, 12 through 14. And it shall come to pass when 70 years are accomplished that I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation, saith the Lord, for their iniquity in the land of the Chaldeans, and will make perpetual desolations. And I will bring upon that land all my words which I have pronounced against it, even all that is written in this book which Jeremiah hath prophesied against all the nations. For many nations and great kings shall serve themselves of them also, and I will recompense them according to their deeds and according to the work of their hands. So, if he said in verse 12 that it shall come to pass when 70 years are accomplished, and the book is from 625 or so to 586, he wrote that in his latter days when it was about over. And he prophesied at the last taking away in 586 that there would be 70 years of captivity. We'll learn more about this next week when we start studying the book of Daniel. But with the book of Ezra picking up in about 538 BC, years, if you go from 86, the years of captivity, when would be 70 years from 586? 516? I don't personally believe that that's what the date that he was talking about from 586, the final carrying away. When was the first carrying away? About 605. So 70 years from 605 puts you to what? About 538, 537. That is where the book of Ezra starts. So I'm thinking that in Jeremiah that when he's talking about that 70 years, he is talking about from the first carrying away is when all of this is going to start. Because, like I say, Daniel picks up in 605 when we get to the next week, when we get to the book of Daniel. But if it all falls in line, if you use the first carrying away, and then there was a second carrying away, what was that, Terry, about 597, somewhere right in that range? About 10 years each. So you get the second carrying away and then the final carrying away when all that took place. Questions, comments? Have I got you thoroughly confused? All right. So the book of Ezra would cover the period of time from about 538 to about 456. If you look at the book of Nehemiah, Nehemiah picks up where the book of Ezra leaves off. And so the book of Nehemiah covers from about 456 BC to about 443 BC. So that's only about 12 or 13 years for the book of Nehemiah. At one time, the book of Ezra and the book of Nehemiah were considered one book. And it was an add-on to the book of Chronicles. So, and then it was divided out. What was, now Ezra goes through and outlines several things. He's not alive during this whole period of time, but he's outlining the things that happen from the year that this starts up through things. The first one to be released and go back from captivity was a man by the name of what? Starts with a Z. Zerubbabel. What was Zerubbabel's main responsibility when he went back with the group that went back with him. Because remember, they had been captive for 70 years, and the last siege of the capital, the final carrying away, as Brother Plantz referred to it, in 586, there was actually a siege on Jerusalem, and the walls, the temples, destroyed, looted, things of that nature. So if you just put things in a common sense way, what would be his role as he goes back? The first duty would be to what? I'm sorry? Rebuild the house of God. Second is Ezra's. What's Ezra's role? Right. Nehemiah finishes that project off. What's Ezra's main role in this? Was the spiritual rebuilding. And then Nehemiah comes in to finish off the walls and put things back in, get everything going again. Why is it necessary, or why was it necessary to do things in that manner? If we look at the period of captivity that we'll really go into next week with Daniel, but if we just look at it on an overview, how long were they in captivity? From 605 to 538, 70 years. Took them away 3 different times. Did all the people that came back from captivity, had they gone into captivity? How many of them were born in captivity that never knew anything but captivity? I would surmise probably the majority of them. I know that people lived longer at times in the Old Testament than we do today. But if I were to go into captivity today and 70 years later come out, I would have 70 years of knowing nothing but, I'd go in at the age of 4. At the age of 4, you don't know anything. So all you know from the age of 5 to your 74 or 5 is being in captivity. So you don't know the old way. Some of them may have lived that long, but if I sort of equate it to what happened when they left Egypt. How many of them that left Egypt entered the Promised Land, and that was only 40 years? You can count them on one hand, can't you? The 2 honorable ones. Everybody else died in the wilderness. So what went into the land of promise was those that were born in the wilderness that didn't know anything except what had been told them history-wise. Same thing is happening here. Those that were born in captivity didn't know any other way than captivity, so they have to send in somebody to rebuild things. They have to send in Ezra to rebuild spiritually, and basically he is starting from scratch with a lot of these folks. Because what happened when they were in captivity? Who were their friends? Did they worship the same way? Did they eat the same way? Daniel did, but Daniel was one of those special characters, wasn't he? For the masses, they would have, I'm going to use a 50-cent word here. For the masses, they would have acquiesced and did what their captives wanted. So, questions or comments? Let's look at Nehemiah. If we go to chapter 1 of Nehemiah, starting with verse 1, it says, "The words of Nehemiah the son of Hachaliah, and it came to pass in the month Chislev, in the 20th year, as I was in Shushan the palace, that Hananiah, one of my brethren, came, he and certain men of Judah, and I asked them concerning the Jews that had escaped, which were left at the captivity, and concerning Jerusalem. And they said unto me, the remnant that are left of the captivity there in the province are in great affliction and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem also is broken down, and the gates thereof are burned with fire." If you recall, when we were talking about Zerubbabel, when he went back, first part of Ezra, what happened when he started rebuilding? I'm sorry? That's correct. What happened to their effort? Let me phrase it a different way. What happened to their effort to rebuild? It was stopped by whom? Well, technically by the king, but that was because there were some adversaries there that didn't want the place rebuilt. So if you look at chapter 4 of Ezra, chapter 4, it says, "Now when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the children of the captivity builded the temple unto the Lord of Israel, then they came to Zerubbabel and to the chief of the fathers and said unto them, Let us build with you. And then, of course, he refused. Verse 3, "But Zerubbabel and Jeshua and the rest of the chief of the fathers of Israel said unto them, Ye have nothing to do with us to build an house unto our Lord, but we ourselves will build unto the Lord of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, hath commanded us." Then in verse 4 it says, "Then the people of the land weakened the hands of the people of Judah and troubled them in building, discouraged, hired counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius or Darius, king of Persia. And in the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of the reign, wrote they unto him an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. And then and in the days of Artaxerxes wrote Bishlam, Mithradath, Tabel, and the rest of their companions unto Artaxerxes, the king of Persia. And the writing of the letter was written in the Syrian tongue and interpreted in the Syrian tongue." Now, in essence, what all this goes down to is that the group that didn't want Jerusalem rebuilt found a way to take legal actions, did a little bit of lying, and got the king to stop the process. Now, where were we? Back to Nehemiah. So when Nehemiah had heard all of this, verse 17 of chapter 2 of Nehemiah, he then said unto them, Ye see the distress that we're in, how Jerusalem lieth waste, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. Come and let us build up the wall of Jerusalem, that we be no more a reproach. Then I told them of the hand of my God, which was upon me, as also the king's words that he had spoken unto me. And they said, Let us rise and build. So, in chapter, Nehemiah had inquired and found out what was going on. Then he, in a roundabout sort of way, but taking a shortcut through all of this, the king saw him where I guess we could use the phrase his countenance was fallen. He wasn't very happy when he was standing before the king. The king inquired what was going on, and he told him, and in essence got leave of his position with the king to go to Jerusalem with the king's permission to rebuild and fortify, and that's what verse 17 told us there. So Sanballat was the one that was really the prime one that was the driving force to try to interfere with what they were doing. In verse 19, when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, and Geshem the Arabian heard it, they laughed us to scorn and despised us and said, "What is this thing? Will ye rebel against the king?" So this is just another one of their ways of, they wasn't given permission to help rebuild. So now they're going to fight against them to see that they don't rebuild. And one of their favorite tactics was trying to get the king mad at them. So nowhere along the line had Nehemiah, in his speeches to anybody or anybody talking, nowhere along the line had they said anything about doing anything the king didn't want them to do. But this guy, Sanballat, starts trying to put that wedge in between the king and these people. And then Nehemiah answered them in verse 20 and said unto them, "The God of heaven, he will prosper us. Therefore we, his servants, will arise and build. But ye have no portion, nor right, nor memorial in Jerusalem." So in essence, they were going to do the job regardless of what Sanballat and his group from Samaria wanted to do. And in no way were they trying to dismiss or be against anything the king wanted to do. Do we see that happening a lot? And I'm going to emphasize a lot in America today. Flat out lies being told to try to divide people. I think personally one of the most egregious ones that's happened lately the President of the United States accused and said he would punish the Border Patrol that rode horses because of one picture that was taken totally out of context. If you're not familiar with it, the picture is the people, the Border Patrol on horseback. There were a bunch of people coming across the river, and they were working their horses, trying to keep them from crossing into the United States because it wasn't supposed to be here. And one of them was twirling the end of his rein. But all of a sudden, that's a whip. Even the guy that took the photo said that they did not have whips and no one was hit with a rein. But yet, is that what you hear on the media? Is that what the president said? What we need to do is learn from what we're talking about here. If somebody tells us something, we should not take it at face value. We should check it out. Make sure what's right and what's wrong. I get off my soapbox now. Time for other people to jump in. Questions, comments? Yes, sir.
I will say this, that as Christians, a lot of
Years ago, a good friend of mine that was a preacher here at Grandview Pines in 1987 or 88, Brother Andrews, he told me, he made a couple of comments, and like I say, we were good friends. He said, said, the most exercise some Christians get is jumping to conclusions. And that's what happens if we don't check things out. If we just, like you say, even though they may not have done it, they jumped to the conclusion they didn't think they would do it. So, comments? Questions? Answers? Well, let's skip on over a couple of verses then, or chapters then. If you look at chapter 5, it says, there was a great cry of the people and of their wives against their brethren the Jews. For there were that said, we, our sons and our daughters, are many. Therefore we take up corn for them that we may eat and live. Some also there were that said, we have mortgaged our lands, vineyards, and houses that we might buy corn because of the dearth. There were also that said, we have borrowed money for the king's tribute, and that upon our lands and vineyards, yet now our flesh is as the flesh of our brethren, our children, and as their children. And lo, we bring into bondage our sons and our daughters to be servants. And some of our daughters are brought into bondage already. Neither is it in our power to redeem them, for other men have our lands and vineyards. This section here basically is saying that the Jews, their own brethren, was buying and selling, and you had the wealthy, and then you had the poor, and the wealthy were still doing things to even put the poor down farther. They were the poor had to sell their children into bondage so that they could have money just to eat on, and they were running out of things. And if you look at one particular verse, if you go back to verse 4, it says, we borrowed money for the king's tribute. So they were having to do all this to pay money to the king, or that was part of it anyway. But what was the Jewish law that was supposed to be taking place? The Jewish law was that if you loaned somebody some money, the term was usury, but were you supposed to charge them interest? Didn't they get back their stuff at the end of 7 years? Didn't everything supposedly revert back? So here this group of people is doing something totally against what was taught. But I don't want to point the finger too heavily at them, because what had they been living under for 70 years? A whole different way of doing things. They were not living in their own environment and their own culture. They had all these outside influences. But here's where Nehemiah came into play, because all the feasts that the king had and all the people that he would feed, all that came from the people. But instead, Nehemiah starts paying for everything out of his own pocket. He does not take the people's money and put them farther into bondage. He starts paying for it and helping them out of their situation. Again, if we look at things going on in the United States today, I've got about 4 minutes. I'm going to get on one more soapbox, and then I'll be done with my soapbox for the day. But there is one thing that happens in, to my knowledge, every state in the Union, and probably every big city in the United States. And that is these payday loan places, where they flat out take advantage of those that need the most help. You go to a payday loan place and you borrow X amount of dollars, and you have to pay sometime 50, 60, 70% on the initial loan to use it for a couple of weeks. And then if you can't pay it off, that gets rolled into the next where you have to borrow more money to compensate for that. So it's just a domino effect. And it is possible for you to wind up paying in the thousands of dollars for an initial $100 loan just to get you through. There have been many attempts, especially in Montgomery in the state of Alabama, to put limits on the interest that those people can charge and all. But amazingly, for some reason, when it gets to our legislative branch in the state, everybody talks against how bad it is, but then when it gets to the people that have the authority to do something about it, nothing ever happens. We here at our congregation several years ago tried to help a person that had got caught up in that mess. And they had, I don't remember the exact amount, but let's just say that they had borrowed $1,000 and they had put their car up as collateral. When we tried to get involved and help the person, the payoff of that $1,000 loan was now somewhere in the neighborhood of $5,000. And they wasn't late on it. You just couldn't pay it off early. You had to do your thing, so it just snowballed and snowballed. So I sort of think that that's what's happening to these folks here, that they get caught in that trap. Can't do anything about it, but then, like I say, Nehemiah stepped in and said, "We're going to waive all that. Y'all don't have to do anything. You don't have to feed us. We're going to feed ourselves." And then started bringing things back around. Then the book of Esther, that fit nicely in between that. We've gone over and over and over that, so we won't talk about Esther anymore. There's about 2 minutes left, so I'm now going to open it up to Brother Terry and let him say a word or two and chastise me for getting on my soapbox so many times today. Pardon?
That's fine. I'm not going to get on there.
Well, you got anything to say about Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther? Okay. Anybody else? Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther? Genesis? Yes, sir.
Nehemiah started with the physical aspects of the building wall. And then about in chapter 7, it goes into more spiritual reading to it. It's done before the people on the outside of the worship. There's also some spiritual aspects in Nehemiah.
Yes, sir. And also on the building of the wall there, he got the people involved instead of just hiring some people to come in and build. He got everybody involved, had them building the portions of the walls near their place and having them stand watch and guard and things of that nature. So in my opinion anyway, Nehemiah was one of the good guys. He had his act together, trying to help folks out. Anything else?
It is interesting, after thousands of years, human nature hasn't changed any. never going to change.
I recall very distinctly a comment that I made. I love history today, but in my early days, I didn't see any need for history. I made some comment to a teacher about it, and they said, well, we're supposed to study and learn history so we can learn from history not to repeat mistakes of the past. That sort of stuck with me. But today, instead of learning from the past, people try to rewrite the past. So, won't get on that soapbox today. Thank y'all so much. We're about I've got pastime. Somebody needs, I go ring the bell or, yes, sir.
I think, I might be wrong on the date, but the end of Esther is around 400, which is in the Old Testament.
Well, the book of Esther was covered about a 9-10 year period of time, so it would have not been that close to the end. There's still some activity to take place, but it's within 40 years or so of the close of the Old Testament.